The courtroom was buzzing with restless whispers, a mixture of curiosity and disbelief. At the center of it all stood a young black teenager, her hands calmly resting on the wooden defense table. To most observers, she looked out of place, far too young, far too inexperienced to be standing trial for a case that had already attracted media attention. Cameras clicked, pens scratched against paper, and eyes shifted toward the judge, who leaned back in his chair with an amused smirk. Judge Harrison, a man well known for his sharp tongue and lack of patience, cleared his throat. "This is going to be quick," he muttered, loud enough for the entire courtroom to hear. His gaze swept over the teenager, and then, with a condescending chuckle, he added, "Young lady, do you even understand why you're here? Or should I ask your parents to step in and explain it for you?" Laughter rippled across the courtroom. The prosecutor grinned smugly, shuffling his stack of files as if the outcome were already guaranteed. Spectators exchanged knowing glances. In their minds, this teenager was about to be humiliated in one of the most unforgiving rooms in the city. It was supposed to be routine, a formality, an easy victory for the system, but the teenager did not flinch. She did not protest, cry, or even defend herself against the judge's biting sarcasm. Instead, she lifted her chin, her calm presence drawing an odd silence into the room. With a steady voice, she said, "Your Honor, before we proceed, there's something you should know. I am not the defendant. I am the attorney representing this case. My case." The room froze. For a moment, you could hear nothing but the faint buzz of the overhead lights. The prosecutor's smirk faltered. Even Judge Harrison leaned forward, blinking as though he hadn't heard correctly. A teenager? Claiming to be an attorney? Impossible. Or so everyone thought. Gasps broke out across the audience. A reporter dropped his pen. Someone whispered, "She must be joking." Another muttered, "This has to be some kind of stunt." But the teenager remained unfazed. With deliberate precision, she pulled out a sleek black folder from her bag and slid it across the table toward the clerk. Inside were her credentials, bar exam certification, proof of her license, and documents that bore her full name. Alicia Johnson. The judge's smile vanished. He flipped through the papers, his eyes narrowing. The seal was real. The certification was real. The impossible was standing right in front of him. And suddenly, the tone of the courtroom shifted. The whispers weren't mocking anymore. They were awed, confused, even a little fearful. Who exactly was this young woman who dared to step into a courtroom not as a defendant, but as a licensed attorney? What unfolded next would leave everyone, from the skeptical prosecutor to the mocking judge, absolutely stunned. The courtroom sat in a stunned silence, the kind of silence that carries more weight than noise. Judge Harrison adjusted his glasses, his smirk long gone. He had presided over hundreds of cases, seen countless defendants, and dealt with attorneys from all walks of life, but never in his decades of service had he encountered a situation quite like this. The teenager, Alicia Johnson, stood firm, her presence commanding despite her age. She wasn't just a young girl playing dress-up in a courtroom. She exuded the confidence of someone who belonged there. Still, disbelief painted the faces of everyone present. Judge Harrison leaned forward. His voice, sharp but tinged with hesitation, cut through the still air. "Miss Johnson, is it? You expect me to believe that you are an attorney qualified to argue in this courtroom?" Alicia met his gaze without blinking. "Yes, Your Honor. I passed the bar at 17. This is my case, and I am fully prepared to proceed." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Some gasped, some laughed nervously, and others whispered in disbelief. The prosecutor shook his head, scoffing openly. "Your Honor," he interjected, his voice dripping with condescension, "this has gone far enough. This child doesn't belong here. She may have papers, but this is clearly some kind of publicity stunt. Let's put an end to this nonsense before we embarrass the system further." Alicia turned to him, her expression calm, her tone razor-sharp. "Embarrass the system? Or expose it?" The words hung in the air like a challenge. Even the spectators shifted uncomfortably. Judge Harrison cleared his throat, clearly wrestling with his pride. "Very well," he said finally, his voice gruff. "Proceed, but don't expect any special treatment in my courtroom." And with that, the trial began. The prosecutor wasted no time, painting Alicia's client, an older black man accused of fraud, as nothing more than a career criminal who had finally been caught. His words were slick, rehearsed, and designed to sway the jury quickly. He piled on evidence, charts, and testimonies that seemed airtight. But Alicia listened patiently, her pen gliding across her notepad. She never interrupted. She never flinched. She simply waited, absorbing every word, every gesture, every inconsistency. When it was her turn to speak, the courtroom shifted again. She rose slowly, walked to the center, and addressed the jury directly. Her voice was steady, her words deliberate. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, what you've just heard is a story carefully crafted to make my client look guilty. But stories, as you know, can be fiction, and what I will show you is the truth." She began dismantling the prosecutor's arguments piece by piece. Where he had painted a damning picture, she revealed contradictions in witness testimonies, flaws in the timeline, and evidence that had been conveniently left out. She highlighted the systemic biases at play, the assumptions made about her client simply because of his background and skin color. The prosecutor objected several times, his frustration growing with every rebuttal she delivered. But Alicia anticipated every move. Each objection was met with a crisp counter-argument that even the judge struggled to dismiss. Spectators leaned forward, captivated. They had come expecting a spectacle, but what they got was a masterclass in law delivered by someone who, by all appearances, shouldn't have been capable of it. Judge Harrison, too, was changing. The disdain in his eyes was slowly giving way to curiosity, even respect. He found himself leaning in, listening closely, trying to catch her in a mistake, but she gave him none. At one point, the prosecutor slammed his hand on the table. "This is ridiculous! She's just a kid!" Alicia cut him off, her voice rising with authority that filled the room. "Objection, Your Honor. Counsel is resorting to personal attacks instead of addressing the facts. My age has nothing to do with the truth of this case." The judge hesitated, then nodded. Sustained. It was a small victory, but the significance was enormous. The system itself had just acknowledged her legitimacy. As the hours passed, Alicia revealed evidence the prosecution had tried to bury, a key financial record that proved her client's innocence. She presented it with precision, explaining complex legal jargon in terms the jury could understand. The spectators erupted into murmurs again. Reporters scribbled furiously, sensing a headline that would shake the city. A teenager attorney, mocked and doubted, turning a courtroom upside down. By the time Alicia rested her case, the energy in the room was unrecognizable from when the trial began. The laughter was gone. The sneers had vanished. In their place was awe, respect, and a sense of history in the making. Even Judge Harrison sat back in his chair, visibly shaken. He had started the day mocking her, dismissing her as a child out of her depth. Now he was forced to confront the uncomfortable truth. She wasn't just capable, she was brilliant. But the battle was far from over. The prosecutor wasn't finished, and his next move would push Alicia to her limits. The trial was about to take an unexpected turn, one that would test not only her skills as an attorney, but her strength as a young black woman fighting to be heard in a system stacked against her. The air inside the courtroom felt heavier now, thick with tension. The prosecutor's face was flushed, his confidence cracked. He shuffled through his papers, searching desperately for a counterattack. For hours, Alicia had dismantled his case, but he wasn't ready to admit defeat. Not yet. Judge Harrison cleared his throat, his voice steady but curious. "Prosecution, you may proceed." The prosecutor stood, his smile forced, his tone sharpened with desperation. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, "do not be fooled by theatrics. This girl, this so-called attorney, has dazzled you with stories, but stories don't change facts. The fact remains that her client is guilty, and no amount of clever wordplay can erase the evidence." He spoke with renewed aggression, trying to regain control. But his words didn't carry the same conviction they had earlier. He was wounded, and everyone knew it. Alicia sat quietly, letting him rant. She didn't interrupt, didn't flinch. Instead, she waited, calm, composed, her hand resting lightly on a thick file that she had yet to open. When the prosecutor finally rested, he turned to Alicia with a smug glare. "Your move, child." Alicia rose slowly, her expression unreadable. She picked up the file and walked to the center of the courtroom. The silence was deafening, every eye locked on her. "Your Honor," she said, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. "What the prosecution has failed to mention is that their entire case rests on a single piece of evidence, a bank statement allegedly linking my client to fraudulent transfers." She paused, holding the jury's attention. But what they didn't expect is that I would find the original unaltered record. Gasps echoed through the courtroom. Reporters scribbled frantically, cameras flashed, and the prosecutor's face turned pale. Alicia opened the file, revealing documents marked with official seals. She handed copies to the judge and jury. "Notice the discrepancies," she continued, her tone steady but powerful. "The prosecution's record shows transactions on dates when my client wasn't even in the country. Here," she held up another page, "are passport stamps proving he was overseas at the time. The so-called evidence was manipulated." The prosecutor jumped to his feet, shouting, "Objection! This is outrageous! She can't just—" But Alicia was ready. She raised her hand and spoke over him, her voice unwavering. "Your Honor, these records come directly from the bank, verified by an independent auditor. The prosecution either failed to investigate properly, or worse, knowingly presented falsified evidence." The words hit like a hammer. The courtroom erupted in gasps and murmurs. Judge Harrison banged his gavel. "Order! Order in the court!" But Alicia wasn't done. She stepped closer to the jury, her eyes sharp, her presence commanding. "This isn't just about my client. This is about a system that too often assumes guilt before innocence, especially when the accused looks like him. And today, we have proof. Proof that not only clears his name, but exposes negligence, or perhaps misconduct, on the part of those who were supposed to uphold justice." The prosecutor stammered, his hands trembling. This is impossible." Alicia turned to face him directly, her voice calm but devastating. "What's impossible, sir, is continuing this charade when the truth is laid bare for all to see." For the first time all trial, the prosecutor had no words. His silence was louder than any argument. Judge Harrison examined the documents carefully. His face, once smug and dismissive, now carried a heavy weight of realization. He looked up, meeting Alicia's eyes. There was no mockery left, only reluctant respect. The climax of the trial had arrived, and Alicia had turned the tide completely. The jury members whispered among themselves, some nodding, others staring at her with newfound admiration. Then Alicia delivered her final blow. "Your Honor, I move to dismiss this case on grounds of insufficient evidence and prosecutorial misconduct." The room exploded. Reporters rushed to capture every word. Spectators gasped, and even the clerk looked stunned. The prosecutor sat down heavily, his face buried in his hands. Judge Harrison banged his gavel repeatedly. "Silence! Order in the court!" When the noise finally settled, he leaned forward, his expression solemn. Given the evidence presented, and the clear discrepancies between the prosecution's records and the verified documents provided by the defense, this court has no choice but to dismiss all charges against the defendant. The words hit like thunder. The case was over. Alicia had won. The courtroom erupted in applause. Spectators stood, clapping and cheering. Some shouted her name, others whispered in awe. "She's incredible. She's a genius. Did you see how she handled them?" The prosecutor sat in defeat, his career likely in ruins. Judge Harrison exhaled slowly, then looked at Alicia once more. He hesitated, then nodded slightly, a silent acknowledgement of her brilliance. Alicia returned to her seat, her expression calm, almost serene. She hadn't just defended her client, she had proven herself in the face of doubt, prejudice, and arrogance. She had forced a courtroom that mocked her to recognize her genius, and yet, this was only the beginning. The echo of Judge Harrison's gavel still lingered in the air, but the courtroom was alive with energy. People surged to their feet, reporters scrambled toward the doors to file breaking headlines, and the defendant, once slouched with despair, now stood tall, tears streaming down his face. Alicia closed her file with a calm precision, almost as if nothing extraordinary had happened. She knew the battle had been bigger than one case. What she had just done would ripple far beyond these four walls. The bailiff moved to escort the defendant out, but before leaving he turned to Alicia. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice trembling. "You saved my life." Alicia gave him a small nod, her expression softening. "No," she said quietly. "You saved your life by trusting me." Meanwhile, the prosecutor sat frozen, his face pale and defeated. His papers lay scattered on the desk, useless now. Every word he had spoken, every sneer, every dismissal of Alicia as a child had come back to haunt him. The courtroom, once his stage, now felt like a cage. Judge Harrison leaned back in his chair, visibly shaken. He had been part of the mockery, too. His condescending tone, his doubts, his willingness to indulge the prosecutor's dismissiveness, all of it weighed on him now. For the first time in years, he felt ashamed. "A remarkable defense," he muttered under his breath, but loud enough for Alicia to hear. She looked up, her eyes steady. There was no smugness in her face, no gloating, only quiet conviction. "Justice isn't about who speaks louder, Your Honor. It's about who brings the truth to light." The judge said nothing, but his silence was heavy with regret. By the time Alicia stepped through the courthouse doors, cameras flashed like lightning. Journalists crowded around her, shoving microphones toward her face. "Who are you really?" one shouted. "Are you even licensed to practice law?" another demanded. "How did you uncover the falsified records?" Alicia raised a hand, signaling for calm. The crowd quieted, not because she demanded it, but because her presence commanded respect now. "I'm a law student," she began, her voice steady, "and I've spent years studying not just the law, but the patterns of injustice that often plague it. Today was not about me. It was about proving that truth still matters, even when the odds are stacked against it." The journalists erupted with more questions, but Alicia continued. "We live in a system that too often underestimates people based on their age, their gender, or the color of their skin. I was mocked, dismissed, and nearly silenced in that courtroom. But none of that changed the facts. And today, the facts won." Her words spread like wildfire. Within minutes, news outlets blasted headlines. "Teen genius outsmarts prosecutor in landmark court case." "Judge mocked her. Now he calls her remarkable." "Black teen law student exposes fraudulent evidence." The internet buzzed with clips from the trial. Social media filled with praise and debates. Some called her a hero, others questioned the legitimacy of the system that allowed her to even be mocked in the first place. But one thing was clear. Alicia had shaken the establishment. That evening, Alicia returned to her modest apartment. The adrenaline had worn off, leaving her exhausted. She collapsed onto the couch, replaying the trial in her mind. Her phone buzzed endlessly with calls and messages, offers from law firms, invitations to interviews, praise from professors who had once underestimated her. But Alicia ignored most of it. To her, the victory wasn't about fame. It was about principle. She scrolled through her notifications and stopped at a message from her younger brother, Marcus. It simply read, "Proud of you, sis. You showed them what we're made of." Tears welled in her eyes. That, more than the applause, was what mattered. Across town, Judge Harrison sat alone in his chambers. The courtroom had emptied, but his mind remained restless. He replayed every word, every smirk, every time he had dismissed Alicia without giving her a fair chance. He poured himself a glass of water, staring into the reflection. "How many others have I silenced before her?" he muttered. Her words echoed in his head. "Justice isn't about who speaks louder, it's about who brings the truth to light." For the first time in decades, Judge Harrison realized he had forgotten that truth. He had allowed arrogance, bias, and tradition to cloud his judgment. And today, a teenager had reminded him of his duty. The humiliation stung, but so did the lesson. The prosecutor, meanwhile, faced a different reality. Within hours, the news of his misconduct had spread. The Bar Association announced a review of his actions. His colleagues whispered behind closed doors. His reputation, once untouchable, now teetered on the edge of ruin. He sat in his office, the once proud walls closing in on him. He thought about the girl, no, the woman, who had exposed him so effortlessly. He thought about how he had laughed at her, mocked her, dismissed her. Now she had dismantled not only his case, but his career. And deep down, he knew he deserved it. In the days that followed, Alicia became an unexpected symbol. Law schools invited her to speak. Activists reached out, calling her a voice for the underestimated. Even experienced attorneys admitted she had reminded them why they joined the profession in the first place. But Alicia kept her focus clear. She wasn't interested in fame or applause. She wanted change. One evening, speaking at a community center, she told the crowd, "I don't want to be remembered as the girl who embarrassed a judge or a prosecutor. I want to be remembered as someone who proved that justice isn't about age, race, or status. It's about truth. And the truth belongs to everyone, not just those in power." The audience erupted in applause. For many of them, she wasn't just a student or a genius. She was hope. The resolution of that case didn't just free an innocent man. It forced a judge to reflect, toppled a prosecutor's arrogance, and ignited a national conversation. But for Alicia, it was something deeper. She had walked into a courtroom where no one believed in her. She had endured mockery, prejudice, and dismissal, and she had walked out not just victorious, but unshakable. Her journey had just begun. The courthouse lights had dimmed, the chaos of the trial now a fading memory. But the echoes of what happened that day continued to ripple across the country. News stations replayed the footage endlessly, schools debated the implications, and ordinary citizens found themselves inspired, or challenged, by the story of a black teenager who had stood alone against the machinery of doubt, prejudice, and arrogance. For Alicia, the whirlwind was surreal. She had expected resistance, maybe ridicule, but not this storm of attention. Everywhere she went, people recognized her. Some approached with admiration, others with skepticism, and a few with open hostility. The trial had made her a symbol, but symbols were double-edged. They inspired hope, while also provoking backlash. Yet Alicia carried herself with the same quiet confidence she had displayed in court. Fame, praise, even criticism. None of it changed her focus. She understood that what had happened was bigger than her alone. Talk shows debated her every move. Pundits dissected her arguments. Politicians used her story to make speeches about justice reform. "Isn't it troubling," one commentator argued, "that it took a teenager to expose misconduct in our system? What does that say about the rest of us?" Another countered, "It's remarkable, yes, but also dangerous. Courtrooms are sacred institutions. Allowing someone unlicensed to argue a case sets a dangerous precedent." But amid the noise, one thing was undeniable. Alicia had awakened something in people. Social media exploded with hashtags. Justice has no age. Truth over power. Alicia for Justice memes circulated. Inspirational posters with her quotes appeared online. Students across the country, especially young black students, began citing her as a role model. For once, the conversation wasn't just about her, it was about the power of underestimated voices. Weeks later, a letter arrived at Alicia's door. The envelope was official, the handwriting unfamiliar. She opened it and found words that made her pause. It was from Judge Harrison. "Ms. Johnson," it began, "I owe you more than an apology. I owe you acknowledgement. You reminded me of the duty I swore to uphold but allowed arrogance to distort. Watching you stand in that courtroom, facing ridicule yet never wavering, reminded me of the oath I once took with pure conviction. You reignited something I feared I had lost. Respect for the truth above all else. Thank you. Hunter James Harrison." Alicia read the letter twice. She could almost hear the judge's weary voice in every word. She folded it carefully and tucked it away, not as a trophy, but as proof that even the most unyielding institutions could change. While Judge Harrison sought redemption, the prosecutor remained silent. His career was under review, his cases re-examined, his future uncertain. He vanished from the public eye, retreating into the shadows. For Alicia, he became less a person and more a cautionary tale, a reminder of what happens when ambition outweighs integrity. She did not hate him. In fact, she pitied him. His downfall had been inevitable the moment he underestimated truth. Months later, Alicia stood in front of a crowded community hall. Dozens of young people sat eagerly, hanging on her every word. She was no longer just a law student. She had become a teacher of sorts, passing down what she had learned through fire. She spoke with calm conviction. "Many of you will be told you are not enough, too young, too poor, too inexperienced, too black. You will hear those words, and they will try to sink into your bones. But let me tell you this. Truth is not measured by age or skin color. Justice does not belong to the powerful. It belongs to those who are brave enough to fight for it." The room erupted in applause. Some students cried. Others clenched their fists with determination. For them, Alicia was not a myth. She was proof. Later that evening, Alicia returned home, exhausted but fulfilled. She sat by the window, watching the city lights flicker. She thought of her mother, who had worked endless shifts to support her. She thought of Marcus, whose text had given her more strength than any headline. And she thought of the courtroom, the glares, the laughter, the disbelief. It would have been so easy to shrink that day, to accept the role others assigned her. But she hadn't. And because she hadn't, everything had changed. She whispered to herself, almost as a promise, "This is just the beginning." Years would pass, and Alicia's name would become more than just a headline. She would graduate top of her class, pass the bar, and continue her fight for justice. But even as her achievements grew, people would always remember that first case, the day a teenager stood in court and reminded the world of something it had forgotten. That truth, no matter how quiet, can still silence the loudest mockery. That justice, no matter how delayed, can still break through arrogance. That courage, even in the smallest form, can reshape the system itself. And somewhere, deep in the history books of law and justice, her story would remain a lesson, not just about a girl who shocked a courtroom, but about a woman who showed the world that genius, courage, and truth know no disguise.